Hello friends. Today we are going to discuss about serial killers. Part 2, Psychological Profiling. I am Dr. Suresh Badadmat, Professor of Psychiatry, working at National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences, Bangalore. In this video, I'll be discussing about what is psychological profiling, how it is useful in identifying serial killers, how the investigation of serial killers is done, and challenges involved in investigation of serial killing. Serial killer is an individual who has committed a series of two or more murders in the separate incidents, typically involving some degree of psychological and emotional gratification. These murders are often committed over a period of time with a cooling off period between the two episodes of killing. As per the FBI, definition of serial killer focuses on the repetitive nature, the semi-mediated or premeditated killing, the motivation invariably sexual, emotional, financial, or combination. There will be a ritualistic behavior of killing that is a signature for a specific serial killer, and invariably returning to the daily activities in between the killing, that is the cooling off between the two episodes of killing, is a hallmark of serial killers. Now let's understand profiling of these serial killers and also the violent offenders. FBI's Behavioral Science Unit has been analyzing crime scenes in an attempt to generate profiles of violent offenders. The invention of computers, various databases, and also algorithms have helped to identify these profilers. Profiles consist of aggregated data collected from various sources which combine to indicate specific characteristics relevant to the offender. Psychological profiling is also called as behavioral profiling, criminal profiling, FBI method of profiling, and investigative profiling. Profiles are created invariably retrospectively. They are developed via observation of the crime scene, examining the victim or the postmortem report, analyzing the modus of operandi with regard to crime, interviewing the survivors, the victims, interviewing the witness, and in few occasions, if they are able to catch the offender, interviewing the accused plays a crucial role in profiling these offenders. The criminal profiling is an interrelationship between physical and psychological evidence left at the crime scene. Here, what is that interrelationship between? The physical evidence is the crime scene, the dead body left, the weapon, and the way the crime was committed. Here, the psychopathology of the accused, the way he behaved with the victim, the way he committed the crime, how much suffering he inflicted on the victim, and the modus of operandi will dictate the psychopathology of the offenders. Let's look into the stages of profiling. Invariably, there are 5 stages of profiling. First one is assimilation, that is, collecting the evidence from the crime scene. Next, classification, integrating the information and classifying the offenders. That is, once you have collected the evidence, you classify the evidence, reconstructing of the behavioral sequence involved in the crime. Here, based upon the classification of the accused behavior, you will reconstruct the crime scene. Now, looking at the any signature or very specific idiosyncratic behavior of the accused or the perpetrator will be identified. Finally, constructing a complete profile. Now let's look into actually how this profiling is done. Once the information about the crime or the homicide has occurred, the investigating officer reaches the crime scene. The investigating officer now has access to the crime, crime scene, and the victim. Invariably, especially in serial killing, the offender will not be there. Now, based on the crime scene, the dead body, or else the victim, he needs to start doing the profile. So, how? Who is the victim? Whether it is a sex worker, whether it is a gay, homosexual, children, young women, males, and so forth. What is the type of the crime? Is it a homicide? Homicide plus sexual activity? Overkilling? Is there any ritualistic behavior? Next, the specific crime scene action. What was the behavior before the crime, during the crime, and after the crime? Was there any salient signature behavior? Whether it indicates was there a planning, whether there is a weapon which was used in the crime, or is it missing, way the dead body is disposed, how the assault pattern is there, and also any unusual sex pattern needs to be documented. As per the Batman and Salfati in 2007, they reviewed the literature with regard to profiling of violent offenders. They came up with 6 key behavioral categories through literature review. The first one is how the offender disposed the body. What was his behavior? How did he dispose the body is the first. Second one is forensic awareness of his behaviors. Whether how he tried to destroy the evidence. Was there any mutilation of the body? Is the third one. Weapons used in the offense. Was there any theft and associated behaviors? Sexual act. And finally, the control and the violent behavior. These are the various 6, and the last one was identified by Soronsky and Salfari in 2018. That means whoever is doing the profiling, they need to look into these 7 important factors. These profiles in turn are meant to aid the law enforcement agency in detecting and apprehending the violent offenders. Studies have suggested, along with these 7 important factors, one need to look into the personal histories and personality factors of the offender, which gives you a clean and a clear picture about these offenses. In 2011, White and his colleagues did a research which was published in Forensic Science International. The title of the study was Utilization of Forensic Science and Criminal Profiling for Capturing Serial Killers. The objective of this paper was to examine how police first became aware of a serial killers based upon the data from 200 serial killers who were captured. Here, they basically looked into what type of profiling led to the arrest of the serial killers. The authors in the study categorized serial killers into 12. And they, based upon the apprehension of the serial killer, the first one was if the victim was released, the serial killer was found only in 1%. Murder of the serial killer, very rare, it is 1%. Serial killer voluntarily went to the police and confessed the crime, only 2%. Identified as being with victim just prior to the murder, only 2%. Sent communication with police or media telling about the killing, only 2%. Caught in the act, only 5%. Victims who survived the attack, only 7%. Victim escaped, 8%. The majority of them are here. If a good surveillance, DNA, fingerprinting, that is, linking the offender with the crime scene, that is 16%. Linking the victim to the eyewitness, such as relative, friend, neighbor, lover, co-worker, and other types of personal connection between the two parties. Invariably, 16% were arrested for other crimes, stealing, rash driving, and violence. In 20%, the serial killer was turned or informed to the police by the family member, cellmate, friends, or accomplice. So, the successful profiling invariably is by linking the crime scene to the serial killer, looking for the eyewitness. If there are any offenses, similar offenses, looking for the evidences, and also informing the family members and public at large what we are looking for. This study concluded the criminal profiling tool were used in at least 7 serial killer investigation. However, the authors were very clear. The psychological profiling of criminal is a tool used by the investigator to narrow the focus of the investigation, but not to identify a suspect. So, my dear friends, psychological profiling do have a role, but it's very limited to focus the investigation and to identify the suspect. Now let's look into the limitation of the profiling. Invariably, it is a retrospective in nature. Many a time it is considered as an educated guess based upon the available data. Every serial killer does not fall into the above categories. Combination of factors play a role in serial killing based upon the availability, based upon the desirability. At the same time, environmental factors do play a role in committing the crime. The psychological profiling of a criminal is a tool used by the investigator to narrow the focus of the investigation, but not to identify a suspect. Hence, when we are doing psychological profiling, we should not look for the motive. We should look for the killer. That means our focus should be to find the killer. It is very unlikely by using profiling you can find the killer. It only gives a picture or a window to understand the mind of the serial killer. Despite the development of refined typologies, researchers have found there is no such thing. There is a prototypical serial killers. That means the profiling has a limited role in finding the serial killer. Now let's look into the personality of serial killers. 60 to 70% fall either into antisocial personality disorder, also called as psychopathy, narcissistic personality disorder, and paranoid. Invariably, the combination of these personalities are seen in serial killers. If you look at the antisocial personality disorder, invariably the psychopathy triad, that is 30 to 80%, is seen. The psychopathy triad are affective deficit or emotional deficit, that is, lack of empathy, lack of remorse, or lack of guilt. Interpersonal deficit, they are shallow in emotion, manipulative, they do not have any connectedness with any human being. They will use the humans for their gain. Behavioral deficit, impulsivity, manipulating, criminal versatility is noted in this type. Narcissistic type invariably have self importance, admiration, inflated sense of self, grandiose, and self centered thinking behavior is known. Paranoid personality invariably will have suspiciousness, bearing grudge, tendency to interpret neutral stimuli as a hostile, persistence tendency to self reference, tenacious sense of personal right. Few studies have indicated towards schizoid and compulsive trait. There is no single personality which indicates towards the serial killer. What about the psychiatric disorders? Very rarely, violent offenders are known to have serial or severe mental disorders, such as schizophrenia, autism spectrum disorder. That means serial killers do not have mental illness. Invariably, they have paraphilias, deviant sexual behavior, and psychopathic personality. Very few had organic brain disorders such as brain injury, frontal lobe tumors, and epilepsy. Invariably, some of the violent offenders used drugs and alcohol during the commission of crime. However, serial killers invariably enjoy killing, hence, they do not take alcohol. What about this paraphilia and serial killers? Paraphilias are sexual drives involving recurrent, deviant sexual fantasies, urges, and behaviors. Paraphilia refers to a pattern of sexual behavior or arousals characterized by atypical or unconventional preferences. They are considered deviant according to the social norms, falling at the outer limits of the sexual behavior continuum. Invariably, these sexual offenders, violent offenders, has sadism, is which is very commonest. Other paraphilias which are known to exist as sadism, masochism, transvestism, cross-dressing, fetishism, voyeurism, pedophilia, autoerotism, exhibitionism, bestiality, cannibalism, necrophilia, pacorism, and telephone scatologia. What are the motives? Motives are anger, power, thrill to kill, sexual in nature, sheer dominance over the victim, ideology regarding something that leads to killing, financial gain, criminal underworld activities, and combination of factors. Now let's look into the investigation into serial murders. Identifying the homicide series is the first step. One need to understand whether there is a similar type of modus of operandi, similar type of victims, similar types of dead bodies, similar type of signatured killing, overkilling, unusual killing, and difficult to find the offender. Once you identify similar types of killing is there, one need to communicate with the neighboring jurisdiction police investigating officers, adding these violent crime to the national database. Once you have a good database with regard to homicide, child sexual offenses, violent sexual offenses, try to look into the pattern. Once you have a pattern, you need to accept, yes, there is a serial killer or else serial offender who is in action. Immediately, they need to have a leadership, a person who starts the investigation, and at the same time, who gives a team of investigator who will lead the investigation. Please remember, the leader and the investigator should be separate. Leader is the one who will help in collecting the resources, buffering the political and public pressure so the investigators can do their job. Many a time, people say that investigator and the leader should be separate. Leader should be there only to support the team, lead the team. The investigator should not be involved in taking the public pressure, political pressure, or media pressure. Small group of experienced homicide investigators under the direction of a lead investigator is far more effective than having number of less experienced investigators. Invariably, these investigators should have critical thinking, have huge number of experience, who are flexible, who are intuitive, who are hardworking. Along with this investigator, one need to have the medical forensic expert, if possible a psychiatrist, forensic psychiatrist. Along with this, a group of psychological experts can aid the investigation. There should be regular debriefing whenever the investigation is progress. The reason being is, once the serial killer investigation starts, it may run to months and years. Invariably, it is a 24/7 job. Whenever there is a shift from one shift to another shift, that is from morning shift to evening or night shift, the debriefing should occur so that the next shift people know how to follow up on the leads. Leader should be able to buffer the external pressure. The investigator should focus only on the investigation. There should be a public information officer or else a media spokesperson who is not involved in the investigation and who is dark, who does not know about the investigation, should be exclusively appointed for the investigation. The reason being is, if an investigator becomes the media spokesperson, he may leak the information which can be detrimental to the investigation. Hence, need to have an experienced media spokesperson who is not involved in the investigation is very essential in this information technology era. One need to understand this. If the all public wants to know what is happening, how the investigation is going, hence separating the investigators from the media spokesperson is very essential, and the media spokesperson should know only what the public should know. Hence, the leader should make sure the public officer is not involved in the investigation and is good in talking to the media. And the investigator should avoid interacting with the media or social media. What are the challenges in the investigation of serial killer? Invariably, very few people are involved in serial killing investigation. Although they may have experience in homicide, invariably they end up doing classical homicide investigation. They go behind the motive, not behind the serial killer. Insufficient communication between the investigators, between the two jurisdiction, between the state police and also judicial officers. Many a time, there is no communication between the medical officers who is doing postmortem. They need to have a single medical officer who is involved in the similar type of serial killing victims postmortem. We need to have violent crime database so that using algorithms we can find whether there are similar types of killing occurring across the country. Any serial murder investigation The focus should be identifying the killer, not the motive. That is very, very essential. Handling the media is a big challenge. Many a time, our own police officers may leak the information to the journalist. Unwanted information going to the public may hamper the investigation. Only the exclusive media spokesperson appointed by the police who is not involved in the investigation should speak to the media. And the media debriefing to be done regularly, and we need to caliber the information which is given to the media. Periodic update is very essential. To conclude, my dear friends, psychological profiling means analyzing the crime scene in an attempt to generate a profile of the violent offender. Profile consists of aggregated data collected from several sources, which combine to indicate the specific characteristics relevant to the offender. The psychological profiling of a criminal is a tool used by the investigator to narrow the focus of the investigation, but not to identify a suspects. Profiling is only part of the investigation, not a substantial investigation. It helps the investigator to focus on the offenders, and it is not very useful in the court of law. It can explain the mind of the serial offender. It is only a circumstantial evidence in the court of law. If you want to know more about these serial killers, what is the etiology of the serial killers, please do subscribe to my channel and connect me by scanning the QR code. Thank you very much. Stay safe.